Hello and welcome to Visionary Voices, powered by Optimum Healthcare IT, our conversational thought leadership podcast where digital and technology healthcare leaders come to talk about their latest transformations, their latest innovations, and successes at their organizations. I'm your host, Larry Kaiser, Chief Marketing Officer at Optimum Healthcare IT, and I'm excited to bring a season of new leaders, new ideas, and new conversations with people shaping the future of our industry to you, our listeners. And with that, let's dive in. Hello and welcome to this episode of Visionary Voices. Today we're joined by an old friend of mine, Jim Bilsky, Vice President of Enterprise IT Operations at Baptist Health here in Jacksonville, Florida. For those that don't know, Baptist Health, it serves families throughout the Northeast Florida region with more than 200 primary care and specialty physician practices, children's specialty clinics, home health care, behavioral health, occupational health, rehab services, urgent care, and I'm sure a lot more. Jim is a seasoned technology executive known for driving enterprise-wide innovation and leading large, high-performing teams. He has very deep experience building integrated platforms, shaping strategy, and guiding major programs. He's been recognized for his ability to deliver clarity, growth, and results, and is overall a great guy. So, Jim, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Well, thank you, Larry, for having me. Appreciate it. We go back a long way, so I appreciate those compliments.
Yeah, we do. As I was getting ready for today's conversation, I was kind of thinking a little bit, and you are one of the first people I met 21 years ago when I got into healthcare IT when we worked at Keen together.
Yeah,
So we
that
go
brings
back a
back a
ways.
lot of memories, and a long, long time ago. Probably a lot more hair then too, as well. So certainly a interesting journey and history along the path.
For sure. I always say whenever I'm, just looking back, I'm like, I can't believe I've been in healthcare IT for 21 years now. And I look back at our time at Keen and, you know, I still run into many people throughout the industry. It's just interesting to see the different avenues people went that way, which you did the same because when I met you, you were in sales, and you transitioned into your current role. So I'm sure that's an interesting journey, for you. I'm not sure if you want to give our listeners any insight um, into that journey a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, definitely an interesting career journey, without a doubt. I think it goes along with healthcare as well, right? Healthcare is not static. It's very dynamic, lots of changes. And I saw that in my own personal career over the years from when I first started in the software development side and leading the development of applications to the acquisition of our organization to Keen, where you and I met with another friend of ours. Um, and taking a role in the sales side and leading a sales organization, and then journeying over to Baptist, where I started my career here on the provider side, doing different things. And I think along the way, you learn something unique and beneficial as a building block to everything. So from building applications, you learn something, selling them, and listening to our prospective customers, asking questions and what their needs are, to being on the provider side now, me asking the vendors questions. I somewhat know how it goes and how it flows. So, we certainly learn from that and journey across. So it's definitely been creative and interesting and very eye-opening as I've been able to see all different sides of building software, building systems, selling them, implementing those, and now, leading the group from an enterprise operations perspective, how we can bring that all together. Because ultimately it's all about the patient, and then how do we provide those services needed for our clinical team members and all the team members that support them across the board each and every day. So it's definitely an interesting and fun path.
And I'm sure, the experience of being on the vendor side and in sales has helped you in a way because, all the questions that, provider organizations used to ask you, in turn, you're probably asking them the same questions now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the most fun I have is when I look at contracts because I know what we can. Oh, we can't do that. Yes, you can. Here's why. Here's what you can do. Oh, that's a revenue recognition problem. That's not a contractual problem. That's a you problem.
Mhm.
So having been presented with those challenges and questions, it helps because as we build relationships with our various vendors, you can meet them in the middle and help bridge the gaps and understand where they're coming from as much as where we need to go from a business perspective of running the health system. So we can help bridge that gap and provide some suggestions because I certainly have a bank of suggestions that you and I and others created over the years, and just kind of go through
Yeah.
that mental Rolodex of, oh, that's answer 23. We could do it this way. How about this? So it's all about asking better questions and presenting options so that we can get over things and through hurdles. But yeah, it's definitely been a great journey from being on both sides. It's definitely helped a lot from the sense that I can see it from all angles and gives me that dynamic and 360 view of things.
Yeah, and we've spoken to many um, leaders in healthcare between our first season and now into our second season of this podcast, and um, we get to hear a lot of very interesting perspectives. And you're our first guest who came from a sales side of that, so I appreciate the insight that you can bring to there. So, and of course, I would be remiss in saying that we jumped into your journey and we completely skipped over our usual first segment of bandwidth banter, which is perfectly fine because we're a podcast and we like to be conversational, so we can go in any order we really want to. So, but usually, we talk, we like to take a few seconds and kind of talk about random stuff, icebreakers, to help our guests learn about our listeners on a more personal level. I think it makes it uh, a more enjoyable listening experience when you get to know the person that you're talking can share a little bit about themselves. So, you know, going back in our history, we used to have all sorts of very interesting and in-depth conversations about music with another former friend of ours. Um, so, what's the last concert you saw?
Oh, wow. The last concert I saw, that's a great question. Probably goes back a ways. Actually, Def Leppard. I was gonna go see them last year in Orlando, but wasn't able to go see them most recently. But it goes back to probably Def Leppard years ago.
I have seen them and they are very enjoyable. And the one thing I've always noticed about Def Leppard is they literally have the same exact stage setup from the 80s. The
They
elevated, the
haven't
elevate, the
changed.
elevated, the elevated guitar stands for the guys to stand on, and then Joe Elliott likes to do his thing, and the guitarist still doesn't wear a shirt. I've always noticed that. All these years later, he must be 70 years old. He still doesn't wear a shirt when he's on the guitar. But anyway,
It must be doing something right. They're living
must be doing
long.
something right. But they are an
And I guess,
enjoyable.
yeah, they definitely are enjoyable. And I guess the other item would be probably in Nashville at Vive was who
Black
was
Crowes.
that? What's that? Black
Black
Crowes?
Crowes.
Yes, yes. So I I'm not considering that a concert. It was inside, but yeah, close enough.
As the
It was
sponsor of that
fun.
event, it was a fun show. Um, Chris and Rich Robinson are two very, very nice guys. I had spent a little time with them backstage prior to that. They put on a great, great set. I enjoyed it quite a bit. So
Yeah, it was definitely an enjoyable evening. So
yeah.
so I guess I'll have to refine my answer. That was the last concert, but going back prior to that was Def Leppard.
All right. Well, you know what? If as long as you can say, yeah, an industry event is where you saw a concert at, I guess that's an okay thing. So
Exactly.
all right. So we've had a little fun. We had a little reminiscing here, but let's dive into kind of the meat of the conversation here. Um, so us, Optimum Healthcare IT, we're here based in Jacksonville Beach. Baptist Jacksonville is our hometown hospital. So you know, as a resident of the area, you know, I see all of the growth that's been going on with Baptist Jackson. You guys have been going through some significant growth over the past several years. You're currently building a new four-story emergency and patient tower. That growth, of course, is expanding the care for children and adults here in Northeast Florida. And I'm sure as that building is getting constructed and other M&A activity is going on, it's a big part of your day-to-day long-term strategy. Can you share with us what the organizational growth looks like within the IT department?
Yeah, for sure. I probably pretty easy to answer. It's pretty flat, right? So unlike every or just like every other organization, we're challenged across the board on resources and staffing and everything else. So one of the things that we work on very significantly over the last several years to overcome some of those challenges is standardization. So we viciously standardize so that the footprint, the technology footprint that we deploy is the same everywhere where possible to support everything that's going on in those locations. But that gives us a foundation that is very familiar, and then we can train our team to be comfortable with that tech stack, and then they know it's repeatable everywhere else. So, that's definitely one of the healthcare challenges, probably nothing unlike you've heard from every other customer of yours or interaction of folks like me. Do more, go fast, so that one of those ways is to reduce variability so it's not a unique snowflake in every instance.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I'm sure the use of AI comes in to play there quite a bit, AI and automation as you're standardizing things across the board, I would think, right?
Yeah, we're definitely looking at AI ops as a vector to help improve service and delivery, standardization, templates, gold images wherever possible, and then automate everything to death, right? Where it can be automated, we're certainly looking at how do we automate that so that it's easier across the board, not only from a deployment perspective when we first open a location and we bring the tech into the building, but also afterwards, and how do we support it? And if it's different, how do we remediate it and fix it as fast as possible, right? So having those standards, that gold image, that automation is critical across the board. And it doesn't have to be these huge, big endeavors, right? Everyone tends to think of the big AI initiative, as this big revolutionary item. But if you start small, you can win across the board by taking out a lot of smaller components and achieving a whole lot quickly.
That makes sense. Yeah. So then, I guess, from a roadmap or a best practices perspective, I'm sure that you are with that automation and with that standardization. That's really what those best practices consist of. But when it comes to deploying new hardware, onboarding new FTEs, or even onboarding consultants in some cases, what does that look like for you? I mean, because obviously with new hospitals popping up, obviously you guys open a lot of ambulatory clinics. I passed two the other day that are opening up along a route I was on. How do you approach that?
So we built and worked hard on standardized footprints, right? So we know in a primary care location of X size and by scale what we're going to deploy. So it's really a mechanical process. We know the construction footprint, we know what's going to be in there, and we have a standard template that we just order and deploy to those locations, and they can be brought online pretty quickly from that perspective. So it's not reinventing and reassessing every time. It's here's the standard, here's what we're going to deploy, here's how it's going to look, and we're able to scale that way. As you know, Jacksonville and the geography is one of the challenges we have, right? So Baptist Health runs from Nassau County to St. Johns County. We have a footprint down in Daytona, over in Tallahassee, over in Clay County, and there's many miles in between. So how do we support those things remotely and quickly, knowing that it's a standardized footprint? And then we're looking to further improve that standardization to further pull out variations wherever possible.
I mean, you guys have been live on Epic for what, close to 5 years now? 4 years, 5 years?
It'll be 4 years this coming August the 26th, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly.
So I'm sure once were on a single EHR, that made this endeavor of growth much easier when it comes to automation, footprint, repeatable across the board when you have a single EHR versus, you know, two or three.
Yeah, it certainly comes into play, but there's still opportunity even in a variable based environment, right? So your network doesn't really care what kind of traffic it's passing. So you can definitely standardize on hardware and config endpoints. But yes, we were definitely leveraging the standardization approach with our Epic deployment to further drive that going forward, without a doubt.
Yeah, I would think so. Cool. So obviously healthcare is an ever evolving industry, and one could argue that every day new technology is popping up. So from an IT perspective, how do you guys balance, you know, keeping the ship moving forward with all of the applications or technologies that you have in place, tools you have in place, while also always being more leading edge, bleeding edge with adopting new technologies and tools across the board that will improve care?
Yeah, that's a great question for sure, right? Because it's a difficult balance. Because from an operational perspective, the ideal state is, fix it and, set it, right? If it's not changing, it's predictable. If it's predictable, you know everything going. But as you said, healthcare is exactly opposite. It's changing every day. So we definitely drive for consistency in operations. I think it starts with an awesome team. I have a great group of leaders underneath me that help drive the day in, day out, and respond to our clinicians and patients' needs pretty quickly to, it's tech, so it is going to break, right? Anyone who says it's not is lying. It's going to break. It breaks every day in some cases in certain areas. And it's all, how do you respond? How do you respond to the wow that's not working, or the Rover iPhone device that, it got bricked for some odd reason. So a great group of leaders who drive all those things. And then through that, we also look at what can we learn from the patient experience, the clinician experience, that we can innovate on and improve their life, take something out of the process, remove a step or two of something they have to do just to make their life easier. So we look at that all the time, and it's just everything that comes up, whether it's AI and automation, whether it's AI ops behind the scenes where we can diagnose a problem before it ever hits the user, to how do we use private 5G in a location, or other technologies just to drive improvement or disaster recovery capabilities or resiliency. So, all those things we look at all the time, trying to drive those forward. How do we use drones? Is there a way to use a drone for different mechanisms? And I'm really blessed with a great CDIO, Aaron Mary, who supports us in our initiatives, who helps drive the innovation. And then we try and fail fast. If it's not going to work, that's okay. you learn and move on. Throw it to the side, tweak it, and figure out how do you make it better? How do you do something different? And then go again. So, it's very iterative, it's very quick, it's what works, what doesn't, and then you move on.
I mean, I'm sure, I've seen numbers range that, the average healthcare system has somewhere between 70 to 100 applications. I've seen some organizations have well over 1,000. Um, you know, on average, how many new technologies, applications do you think the organization attempts to implement or does implement in a given year?
Well, we're probably over, I'll guess at this point, 400 to 500 different applications in the enterprise. Um, we're definitely on an app rationalization initiative over time. It's not something that just is one and done. We standardize on platforms, so our varying technologies, Epic, from an EMR perspective, is the benchmark. If it can be done there, why are we not using that? Let's go there first. Let's leverage that. And it goes back to the opening conversation, right? How do we remove variability? If it's all in Epic, then that eliminates interfaces, integration points that could fail. If I eliminate those data points that could fail, I can have better predictability and a better usability and better user experience. So, we're looking at those platforms, but we still bring in point solutions, right? Whether it's, RFID or contact center or other, core tech. We certainly look at that, but we definitely want to leverage existing relationships and software solutions wherever possible.
Yeah, we platforming is an interesting conversation. We hosted a roundtable event earlier this year with Chime, and one of the conversations we had with the panelist was platforming. And that was such an interesting conversation we had because, everybody is, identifying what platforms work for them or what are their core platforms. And that really seems to be what everybody's doing moving forward, right? It used to be back in the day, you had, you know, best of breed stuff. And then people kind of went away from that. And now you have, your EMR platform, your ERP platform, um, potentially a service desk platform or something along those lines. And people are saying these are our three platforms, and anything else we do, any iteration needs to see if that happens there first before we go off and bring in another solution which adds to our tech stack. So, obviously, application rationalization is something that it's probably the biggest buzzword in the industry these days, being that the telehealth is no longer a buzzword, but because everybody's talking about it, because everybody needs to do it, right? Because budgets are tight. So eliminating unnecessary applications and iterating off of your platforms makes a lot of sense. So that's interesting knowledge you share. So I appreciate that. Um, so with all the growth that Baptist Jacks has gone through in say the last, I don't know, 5 to 8 years, is there a specific, like, this is our biggest success story throughout all of the growth that you could share?
That's an interesting, difficult question. Yes, as we do so many things in supporting the organization and the health system. I think obviously our success with Epic, our honor roll gold stars achievement in such a short period of time, I think we as a IT division and organization, we all contribute to that success, right? It goes from everything of how do I support the clinician in their workflow of documentation to the back end, how do I patch and stay current in the operating system to meet all those requirements across the board. So I think, that is a huge one for sure. Being 3.5+ years in Epic and our achievements there have been really stellar from my perspective. I think if we dive down deeper and look at individual accomplishments, the our service level on the service desk, we've driven that up. So our team members, as they do call in, they have faster response. There's a easier means to get help, and we're more proactive in general across the organization, all of which are small items but add up to a lot. It's a tough question because I joke with the team. No one ever calls me to say, "Hey, my Wi-Fi experience was great today." Right? I mean, no one's calling to tell us, "Oh, that phone call I made just was awesome. It worked." So, to some degree, our intrinsic mode of success, we're intrinsically driven because a lot of what the team does is behind the scenes, and we only get to know about it when it broke, right? No one's
Mhm.
calling to say those things. So, we learn that, early on. We do a lot of rounding. We listen to our clinicians. We observe. We try and just find the things that we can improve upon, all of which contributes to the success of the fact that if no one calls, that's probably a really good day. But no one calling doesn't mean it's all good, which is why we go out there. The
Mhm.
clinicians' time, they don't have the luxury of just getting on and calling. There's patients at the other end in the emergency room or 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 wherever. So we have to be visible and be out in the field to make sure that what we believe is occurring is what actually is occurring. So we do a lot of that as well, a lot of rounding.
And I'm going to say it's probably one of the best answers I've gotten for a question like that. I think I think an interesting piece to add to that it would be the feedback from your patients. I'll tell you, as a resident that uses, you know, Baptist South, you know, my daughter was born there. I've been in the ER there. My wife's been in the ER there. My daughter's gone, to the Wolfson's ER there. The level of care is phenomenal, and I've never once been there when there's been a software outage or a network outage or anything. So, kudos to your team because that it's a lot, and I was very complimentary of the L&D nurses when my daughter was born there, and there was never any issues. I never saw any tech issues, Jim. So kudos to your team because I've always I've always had a great experience at the hospital. So, um, but yeah, I can
Well,
see where
that's
it's
great to
tough.
hear for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? There's thousands and thousands of moving pieces and things that happen. As you know, Jacksonville's growing, lots of road construction, lots of housing construction, and one misplaced backhoe, and we have problems. So,
Yeah.
certainly redundancy and connectivity is something we worry about all the time and monitor. But again, we just don't want to rely on no one calling to say everything's good. So we have to be out there observing and being present because as our CEO says, we're a people organization. We're not a tech company. Everything at the end of the day is a clinician and a patient. So we try and mirror that as well. And we're visible, we're out there. And when things aren't right, we want to own it and fix it, right? How do we improve it?
Well, usually I like to finish these conversations and say, do you have any recommendations or advice to give? But I would just say, listen to what you just said, right? You're a people first organization. And everything that you just said from an IT perspective is, to me, a blueprint on seeing how well you're doing as an organization and making sure that, you know, everything, as Steve Jobs used to say, just works, So I appreciate that. And I know, obviously, Baptist Jacks is a large health system with a massive footprint and I know it takes a lot to keep it running. So yeah, I think I won't even ask what recommendations you have. I'll just say if you need a recommendation or advice from Jim, listen to his last answer because that right there is a blueprint, people. So awesome.
Yeah,
Well, that
it's interesting, right? You mentioned Steve Jobs because it's definitely a different perspective. If you take it from the consumer backwards rather than from the tech forward, I think you'd be much better served, right? Look at the experience, and it doesn't have to be technically beautiful to an engineer's eyes. As long as the clinician, patient, or provider thinks it's great, then that's the reality, right? So uh, take it from the end user perspective and work backwards, not from the tech stack forward.
that right there is excellent advice. Well, listeners, that concludes our discussion today on Visionary Voices. I want to again thank my guest, Jim Bilsky, for joining us to share his insight. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Visionary Voices, powered by Optimum Healthcare IT. And remember, the future of healthcare starts with your vision. We'll catch you next time.